Goed, allemaal samen terug.
Welcome back for the final plenary session. Because you had such excellent interaction in the workshops and made such good time, the last session of this two-day Congress, this is the first time we're presenting. This publication has been available for a while. It's observations about smoke detectors in homes, so residential smoke detectors. Yes, I need to speak into the mic. I welcome Karin Groenewegen. So Margrethe Kobus and Karin Groenewegen are going to deliver a tandem presentation.
Ja, goedemiddag allemaal. Wij hadden de raadselachtige eer om na 2 dagen...
Good afternoon, everybody. We have the dubious honor of being the last speakers at the end of two full days of conference. We hope you're on your toes, and if you're not, we'll get you there. I'm Karin Groenewegen. I'm a researcher at the Fire Prevention Academy. I'm also a team head in Twente. I'm Margrethe Kobus. I'm a senior researcher at the IFV. I've been doing this for about 13 years. I started out in fire prevention. Ultimately, I continued in physics. I'm dedicated to fire safety engineering. And a few years ago, I did my PhD in human behavior during fires. And I examined self-sufficiency and escapes in fires. And to escape, you need to be alerted. You need to know that there's a fire. And that's how this relates to the subject here. We've divided this into 3 sections. There's a preview at the bottom. First, I'm going to talk about the study and the initial results. Then Karin will talk about practical research. That's the second bubble. And then I'll wrap up with the conclusions. Let me see if I can find the remote control. We conducted a massive study on smoke detectors. It was an in-depth study. We've been studying fatal residential fires since 2008. And in 2012, we performed a multi-year analysis. Based on that, we discovered that there were quite a few fatal residential fires where the smoke detectors did work. And we wondered how it was possible that the smoke detector functioned but didn't make safe escape possible. The Parliament asked some questions based on that study, and as a consequence, BZK circulated questions as to whether the present location of smoke detectors was valid. So we conducted a lot of this study with grant from the Ministry of the Interior. We examined the subject from various perspectives. Of course, we started with a literature review, and we examined international literature, as well as evaluations of smoke detector campaigns in the Netherlands. We analyzed the database and used a residential study that the Ministry of the Interior conducts once every 3 years based on a sample of all Dutch households, in which they also consider the presence of smoke detectors. We also use the database on fatal residential fires that I mentioned earlier, and a database on fires in the Netherlands, where the data comes from the teams for fire investigations. And we analyzed all the data. Specifically for the project, we drafted a list of questions for 2 safety regions. One was Drenthe, the other was Northeast Gelderland. And both those regions spent 6 months recording all fires in residences and examined presence and effectiveness of smoke detectors. And then we conducted an extensive practical studies. Some of you may have attended the workshop about fire tests in Zutphen, and part of that study addressed smoke detectors as well. So we tested some smoke detectors there too. As I mentioned earlier, we examined self-sufficiency and safe escapes from buildings earlier too. That revealed that escape safety depends on three important factors. The first is the danger factor. Those are fire characteristics. The second is the surroundings where you are, so these structural features. And the human factor is also very important. That was basically the foundation for us to examine effectiveness. And we added the smoke detector characteristics for this study, and we examined the entire escape process that starts with detection. In our view, a smoke detector is effective if it detects rapidly and alerts people in the home rapidly. And this needs to happen fast enough for people to have time to escape. And that last part is particularly important. Now, we got some important data about the presence and performance of smoke detectors from our study of homes and the campaign smoke detectors in the Netherlands. And in 70% of Dutch households, there is a smoke detector. That sounds like a very large share, and it is. The question, however, is whether they work and whether they're correctly positioned. If we examine how well smoke detectors work, we see that only 45% of the households has a working smoke detector. In some cases, people have removed the battery. Or the smoke detector no longer works. So that, and if we also examine where the smoke detectors are positioned, because the idea is that you need a smoke detector on every level in an area where there's some interaction. And some homes do have a smoke detector, but not on each floor, so there's no full protection. So ultimately, only 35% of Dutch households has a functional smoke detector positioned in the right place, and that's the first step. Let's increase the basic level to secure smoke detectors, so the ratio between 70% being present, but 35% being functional and in the correct position is a big difference. And you can see the model that we've devised for our study. Here you see the human features that we investigated. First, hearing and ability to wake up. We've noted from a large Australian study that they conducted tests on people who were asleep, and they made the sound of a smoke detector while these people were asleep to check whether they would wake up. They did this with various target groups. So with children, people who had quite a bit to drink, and people who were hard of hearing, as well as people who were sleeping very deeply. We tested this at 2 frequencies. The first was 3100 hertz. That's the frequency of present-day smoke detectors in the Netherlands, and you can see that people who are intoxicated, that 40% of them does not wake up from the sound of a smoke detector. Now, if you lower the frequency to 520 hertz, each of the test subjects woke up. And the same holds true for people who are hard of hearing. You see that with initially 55% of them does not wake up from the sound of smoke detectors, but if you lower the frequency, there's only 8% that doesn't wake up. With the elderly, there's a different problem. They automatically have limited hearing. Not everybody is wearing a hearing aid. So if you're over 65, then apparently you've already lost 30 decibels of hearing ability. And if you look at the required sound level, then that's reduced to a whisper at 5 meters. And that's expected to alert you. So that's a pretty high expectation. Now, if we look at self-sufficiency, that's very important to be able to escape, because you need to have the ability to escape. We've examined figures for fatal residential fires from 2008 until 2013, and this depicts the total number of victims. We have figures about self-sufficiency in the presence of smoke detectors. So these are not all victims, but this does account for the majority. We've divided them into a group of victims that's basically self-sufficient, so physically able to escape, but unable to due to other circumstances, and the people who were physically disabled or had other restrictions. And if we look at the group of those who are self-sufficient, we notice that they're divided equally between people who were in and outside the fire room. So 51 was inside the fire room and 49% was outside the fire room. For those who are less self-sufficient, the ratio is understandably different. You see that about 2/3 was in the actual fire room and was therefore unable to escape. Now, if we consider the victims that with a functional smoke detector system, then we see that most of these victims had impaired self-sufficiency. And in the red column, 46% of the victims had impaired self-sufficiency compared to 20% of those who were self-sufficient. Most of them were in the fire area. Karin will show you what the possible reason was. This is partly because of location. And what you also see among the self-sufficient victims is that 80% did not have a smoke detector or did not have a working smoke detector. And a large share, 54% of those victims was asleep. We can improve a lot there. We're not 100% certain, but with an effective smoke detector, the number of victims should be considerably less. Now, we looked at the smoke detector properties. We looked at the type of smoke detector, how audible they were, and whether they were connected. Well, these are the 3 most important types of smoke detectors that we use in the Netherlands: the optical detector, the thermic detector, and the combined carbon monoxide smoke detector. And most households have a disconnected optical smoke detector that runs on a battery, and that battery is very tenuous because it doesn't last very long, and the question is whether the battery is going to be replaced, and in some cases it goes off when it's not supposed to go off, and then you might want a thermic smoke detector. In our practical tests in Zutphen, we checked whether these smoke detectors were audible. In new construction, there have been certain requirements for since 2003 regarding how audible the smoke detectors are. We've distinguished sleeping areas that contain a bed from other rooms, and they should be at least 75 decibels in sleeping areas and 65 decibels in the other rooms. And we tested this in a room with a wooden floor with hardly any insulation, so you would think that that would be relatively porous to noise. So you would think that if you're standing downstairs, you can hear exactly what's going on upstairs and vice versa. And those tests revealed that the noise level was just around the threshold value, just above or just below. The problem was especially serious in the living room and in the kitchen, because there you have a low noise level of 65 decibels that was not achieved, whereas with the fatal residential fires, we did notice that people sleep there. So you need a noise level of 75 decibels to awaken there. So that's another serious problem. Next, building features. We examined where the smoke detector was positioned, where is the best place to install that, and we examined the impact of doors. On the one hand, the influence for detecting fire, and on the other hand, we examined escape opportunities, and Karin will talk about that. The same holds true for the fire characteristics. We'll talk about that later on, too. We examined the location of the fire seat. We tested various locations, and we examined different threshold values that were achieved. To this end, we applied ISO standards that apply in fire safety engineering, and we also applied some new insights. I'm not going to list them all one by one, but for those who are interested, we tested the heat at various levels in all rooms. We examined carbon monoxide, oxygen rate, and nitrogen and nitrous oxides. And we used two threshold values, one for escape, the other for survival. And now I'm going to hand you over to Karin. Now I'm going to tell you about the practical tests we conducted in Zutphen. Some of you may have heard about this at the workshops, because we combined a series of practical testing in several studies. Initially, it was about fire conduct, and when we said we're conducting a study about smoke detectors, it would be great to test that in practice. So, what did we do? We set fires in homes and used and applied smoke detectors in various positions, and we examined survival possibilities. We checked when the smoke detector would go off and what the situation was then and afterwards. And before I tell you everything, I think that images reveal more than words. So as the music says, just because it burns
we used actual homes, as I said, and we furnished them for a young family with one child, straightforward child with relatively cheap furniture from these large retail stores, 2 parents and a child. And the scenario is that people were present, they were sleeping in the master bedroom, the baby in the baby room, and fire started somewhere. And so we furnitured these houses in the same way with the curtains, furnishings really for a young family. We had measurement equipment, cameras and smoke detectors, optical thermal smoke detectors that we could read in a wireless way. Sometimes we had 30 detectors in a house, and we could always see afterwards when they'd gone off. So the different causes, fire in the kitchen, in the living room, television, in the bedroom, and we placed the smoke detectors in different locations in the different rooms. So for the experiment, we looked at 15 things. First of all, at the top, what do we do? I mean, if you don't have smoke detectors as compared to smoke detectors in the hall and the landing, these are optical thermal detectors. What if you take thermal ones instead of optical one? That is the second possibility. Third possibility, what happens if you open the door, close it? 4 is linking the smoke detectors. As soon as the first one goes off, it activates the rest of the smoke detectors. Once again, we started with the smoke detector in the hall and then the landing, on the landing. And then what is the potential fire room if you place a smoke detector? So I'm going to go through them one by one. This is the first one, just to give you a brief explanation for the bars. Starts off with amber. This is where the fire started, but it hasn't been detected yet. And from the green bar, the fire has been detected by the smoke detector, and you have time to leave the building. As soon as it's red, there's no more possibility to leave the building, but there's a situation in which you can survive, and as soon as it becomes black, you know what I mean. So if we look at that, let me start at the bottom. Ordinarily you start at the top, but I'll start at the bottom. In the living room fire, where the door is closed, you see a difference. You see the point at which you can no longer leave the building and the point at which you die is the same, because it's the same fire. But the moment at which you are warned is different. So in the living room, you see that there's a possibility, a window of opportunity, only a couple of minutes to leave the building. And the other one in the living room, you see that you no longer have the opportunity to leave the building when you're in the bedroom after the smoke detector goes off. And the top one, the second from the top, in the bedroom fire, you see how quickly the fire propagates. You only have 4 minutes, and then you can't survive. And if you have your door open in the bedroom and you have a smoke detector, it goes off after 1.5 minutes, you have 1 or 2 minutes to leave the bedroom. Now, if you don't have that, it's not much of an opportunity to leave the building. The top one is the bedroom with the door closed. And here you have something quite extraordinary. You see that these bars are exactly the same. What does that mean? If you have a fire in this situation in the bedroom and your door is closed and you've got a smoke detector on the landing, the smoke detector will only go off once you've already died in your bedroom. So that is very important. And that explains, some people are self-sufficient, but they were in the fire space. So if you can't hear the smoke detector doesn't go off, you die. Now, the technical detectors or thermal detectors, we've included that. The optical ones sometimes have false alarms in nursing homes. Wouldn't it be a possibility to install thermal detectors in nursing homes? The answer to the question is no, let's not do that. Thermal is fine, as wherever optical is not feasible, in a kitchen, for instance. Here you see both of them. The bedroom with the door open with an optical is the top one. With an optical detector, you have 2 minutes to leave the space. And with thermal, it becomes more difficult. And then a kitchen fire, we looked at the living room, and there you have more time to escape if you have an optical detector. So a thermal detector will detect at a later stage in general, and in terms of escape and safety is less preferable. The effect of the door. You see 2 pictures. We looked at the effect of the door being closed or being open. And the first bar you see, the long green one and the long black one, this bedroom fire, in which in one case the door is open, the other one the door is closed. And you see that if the door is closed, the top one, it'll take a bit longer before the smoke detector goes off. But when it goes off, you still have quite some time to escape. And if the door is open, the smoke detector goes off sooner, but because there's oxygen, the fire will propagate much more quickly, and so there's less of a survival rate. The pictures you see, to be quite honest, when I did these tests, I had just had a baby 6 months before that. So, I mean, if you're here, if you're watching the videos, and these are 2 images at the same time, only in the master bedroom with the door open, baby room with the door closed. Can you imagine the first thing I told my husband when I came home? From now on, the baby room's door will always be closed. You see the difference. Master bedroom, smoke is up to the floor. In the baby room, you had about 35 minutes. You had a high survival rate. So there's an enormous difference. And we have to highlight that also, when it can delay the activation of the smoke detector if the door is closed, but that is only if fire starts in the room that you sleep in. The couples, the linking, if you link the 2, they both go off, and the first smoke detector that detects smoke will also alarm the other smoke detectors. And we see that you have more time. If you're on the first floor and downstairs is where the fire is, it's favorable to have a linking system between the smoke detectors. It'll give you more time, much more time. What you also see is that particularly if the fire is upstairs and you're downstairs, that you have relatively a lot of time. Sometimes the fire upstairs stays upstairs, and the warmth and the heat that go upstairs, and downstairs there's not that much going on. The other way around, it doesn't work. If you're upstairs and the fire's downstairs, you actually have a problem. So as I said, especially if you're in the bedroom, and that's where the fire starts, you have a problem. So we said, okay, what if we install a smoke detector in the bedroom? This is the same fire that I just showed you, the top one. If you have a smoke detector on the landing, in this situation, it won't go off until you have choked on the smoke. But if you have a detector in the bedroom, you still have a couple of minutes. So for us, it's a reason to say that in the most ideal situation, you should have a smoke detector in your bedroom. Summarizing, the top you see the basic level. So ordinarily you'd have a smoke detector in the hall and the landing. Thermal detector actually always has a negative effect. You see the houses at the top. The first one is what is the effect on the fire space itself, effect on the adjacent space in the same floor. Third, what if you're upstairs and the fire's downstairs, and the situation the other way around is the last one. So the thermal detectors don't have a positive impact, as there could also have been an optical one. Opening the door is positive. Closing doors, rather, says the speaker. The only exception is when you are in the space in which there is a fire, and closing the door has a negative effect because the smoke won't reach the detector. You could say, okay, we'll leave the door open, but if there's a fire in the living room, that has a terribly negative effect. So we say it would be preferable to have an additional smoke detector in the room in which you're sleeping. And linking up the detectors has a positive effect, especially if you're upstairs and the fire's downstairs. You'll be alarmed much earlier because it is the smoke that moves upward along the stairwell. And then at the bottom in the fire space, in a potential fire space in any case, in your bedroom, well, preferably in all the spaces, if you have a detector, you will be alarmed first. You'll have the most possibility of escaping the room. Right. I'm going to give the floor back to my colleague. So let's move forward to the final conclusions. First, let's look at the efficacy of smoke detectors in terms of detections in the first phase of the escape process. As we saw in the study that most homes do have smoke detectors, but they're not always positioned in the right place and they don't always work. And that is a first step. Make sure that you have a basic level, i.e. that all homes have smoke detectors in the right position and that are working. Thermal detectors are excellent, but only if an optical detector cannot be installed. It's always better to have optical detectors. So sometimes these detectors go off too late in order to survive if you are in the space of the fire, and a detector in the space of the fire is the best possible option. Let me see, I'm moving in the wrong direction here. So we summarized this in a diagram, and here we actually see the 3 levels. This is what we advise. First of all, a basic level, baseline level, smoke detectors in the hallway and in the landing, not only newly constructed buildings, but in all buildings. And the second recommendation is to position detectors in all spaces, particularly the spaces where you may expect fire, so also the bedroom. And if you really want to get things right, you can also place a smoke detector in the attic and possibly a thermal smoke detector in the garage or in the bathroom. And the second level is our primary recommendation. The alarm. We've seen that the detector can't always be heard everywhere as well. We tested it ourselves with an app on our smartphone, and you can do that yourself as well. So check whether the smoke detector that you have on the landing, whether you can hear it in the kitchen with a strength of 75 decibel. Linking up the detectors, you just saw that. That leads to an enormous extra time to escape the fire. So it's important they be linked. And also the level of the sound isn't always high enough for everybody to wake up from their sleep, and we can't do very much about that. There's a high frequency level. This is something manufacturers would have to deal with, and also to make sure that there are also detectors with a low frequency. Now, for the escape itself, Karin just showed that if you are in the fire room, there's really very little time available to escape. So make sure that you have a smoke detector in that space. If you don't have one, make sure you get out of there as soon as possible. And there's one restriction, really, of the detectors. If you're not self-sufficient and if you have physical issues and you can't escape yourself, it might be useful to hear the alarm, but if you can't escape yourself, you still have a problem. So what you need to do, if you're not as self-sufficient as you'd want to, and you'd have to see, or have to make arrangement with people, with friends or family that can help you escape. And you could do that by making sure that the smoke detector is linked to a receiver, for instance, a smoke detector in the neighbor's house, for instance, or an app on your smartphone. There are all sorts of developments and all sorts of things that can help you here. So that's all as far as our conclusions are concerned in terms of smoke detectors. I don't know whether there are any questions from the audience. Just a moment. I can inform you that the report, the research report, but also publication, which is a booklet that is easy to read, both of them are available on our website, ifv.nl. So the complete report, but also an abridged version. So the stairwell, you see more plans, building plans, in which the stairwell reaches the living room and is connected to the kitchen. Do you have an opinion? Yes, we always have an opinion. Well, the effect, I showed you the effect of the impact of doors. If the door is open, you always have open connections. But if you have a door in between or a closed connection, that can keep smoke away for quite some time. If you have an open connection, and that's what we keep saying, look at your personal situation and take a close look at the structure of the house, the layout, what are the risks that people smoke in bed, where can you have a fire, and on that basis make a thorough plan for your fire detectors or smoke detectors. Well, if there is a fire in the living room, you always have a big problem. I mean, I assume you'd have a smoke detector in the living room, but that way you would still have time to escape. You'd have very little time. You have indicated that batteries constitute a risk. Did you also look at 220 volt or 230 volt linked detectors? Do you want to answer the question, shall I? Well, yes. Well, we looked at smoke detectors in general, but we also looked at the availability of smoke detectors in houses after 2003. You would expect them to work properly. But here in the report you read that even in buildings that were built after 2003, quite a number of the smoke detectors no longer work. And that may be due to batteries that are empty. People forget to replace the battery. But there's also a big group of people who disable the detector simply because they go off too often. Or if they cook a lot and there's a lot of smoke and they don't want the detector to go off. And of course, batteries that are old, that is less of a risk. But we're always dependent upon the people who live there, who disable or don't disable their smoke detectors. And the will improvements depend on private initiatives, or are you going to adjust the building codes? Well, we've given some recommendations to the ministry, and we've said that particularly based on the substance, that we would want to make sure that there be smoke detectors, the smoke detectors be obligatory, mandatory in all buildings, not only in new buildings. But perhaps it's better for René to give the answer, because René is in touch with the ministry, if you want, René. The Ministry of the Interior this year is going to send a letter to Parliament with an opinion on this report and what they're going to do about building codes this year. I don't know what they're going to say, obviously, but it is my impression that as far as sound levels, frequency, location, and linking the detectors, that they will back the report, and they're not yet going to do that for application of existing buildings. By the way, we have seen abroad that rules and regulations for smoke detectors for existing buildings actually have a very positive effect. So make sure that there are more smoke detectors and more of them are operational. No, in the US. My name is John van Lierop of the Industrial Association and also the European Fire Association. You'll understand that fire safety is a choice, and the same applies here. So you may want to follow our initiatives in this respect as well. Right. I would like to thank Margrethe and Karin for their presentation. At the very end of these wonderful 2 days, I started by saying, good morning, friends. So I made more friends. But what's more important, that we have people of kindred spirits. We're very grateful for that. We've listened to many, many speakers. We've had an audience that was extremely interested, and I'm very impressed with the organization and the informal nature. I mean, in the Netherlands, things are slightly different. And so I've enjoyed that, and I've been witness to your interest and your interest in this subject. There's a lot of support for this subject. Thank you very much, and you're doing a good job, so keep up the good job. I would say you're doing a lot better than we are in Flanders. What have I seen? I have seen that there's been quite a bit of emphasis on building, on residence, anything related to that. And there were some perspectives from a chemical background, something we deal with in firefighting as well, but also people who focus on behavior. So not only the hard reality, but also human behavior of firefighters. All these issues play a part. Very important to take into account. And then we had the poster sessions on leadership and command. There's going to be a lot of work in areas that we haven't explored yet that we can really make progress in. There was a big need to connect and not to operate as an island, as a closed community, and to just discuss matters in your own community. Well, we had foreign speakers, and explicitly they were making this connection. They wanted to insist in not working in parallel, but working together to have some cross-fertilization in our results and to continue this quest for more safety for everybody. So thank you, especially to those people of the IFV and René and his conference team. Thank you to them, the logistics staff, and I'm also looking at the interpreters who they deserve a big hand because they have been interpreting all day and very fast. Thank you. But my last words of thanks is to you and the people outside and the people over there, yes, in Minsk. It has been said before, but we should continue this way. Thank you for your very much appreciated presence here, and I hope to see you on the 9th edition. I'm sure we're going to have that. Thank you very much.